The stars outside the windows of the Solstice Runner moved slowly as the ship drifted through deep space. The crew was small, just 6 people, and most were asleep. Only one person was awake, sitting in the control room with a half-empty coffee mug in his hand. Daniel Reeve was a mechanic and part-time pilot. He wasn't a soldier or a hero or anyone special. He just fixed engines, adjusted ship systems, and kept things running smoothly. Life in space was quiet, and he liked it that way. But tonight wasn't quiet. A strange signal had appeared on the radar, weak, flickering, and coming from just outside the edge of a small, glowing nebula. "Captain, I've got something," Daniel said into the comms. A sleepy voice replied, "Is it dangerous?" "Don't think so. Looks like an escape pod. Life signs are faint. We should check it out." Minutes later, with permission granted, Daniel steered the ship closer. The escape pod was old, not human-made. Its hull was smooth and shaped like a silver tear. It floated like a lost feather in space. Carefully, Daniel brought it into the cargo bay. Once the pod was safely inside, he opened it. A hiss of air escaped, and a strange light flickered inside. Lying there, barely conscious, was a woman, but not a human one. She had pale violet skin, long silver hair, and glowing blue lines running along her neck and arms. Her eyes, when they opened slowly, were bright like twin moons. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had heard stories, but never seen one in real life. She was Virelin, a rare alien species known for their grace, silence, and beauty. Most humans only knew them from distant politics or rumors. He knelt down carefully and whispered, "Hey, can you hear me?" She blinked slowly, then turned her head. Her body trembled, weak and cold. Daniel noticed a wound near her shoulder. Not fresh, but not healed either. She tried to speak, but only a strange sound came out. No translator was working. Daniel offered his hand slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." She didn't take his hand, but she didn't push it away either. They moved her to the ship's medbay. Daniel stayed with her while the machines worked to scan her body. The doctors were asleep, and the AI system wasn't trained well on alien biology, but he did what he could. He brought warm blankets, adjusted the temperature, and dimmed the lights. She didn't speak, only watched him with quiet eyes. Later that night, Daniel brought her food, simple broth and soft fruit. She didn't eat at first, but when he smiled and tasted it himself, she slowly followed. It was the first time she trusted his actions. Sitting beside her bed, he looked at her again. Despite her alien features, there was something familiar in her. Sadness, pain, fear. "You look amazing," he said softly. She blinked, confused. Daniel quickly waved his hands. "I don't mean like that. I mean after all this, after what you've been through, you're still alive, still breathing. That's amazing." She looked down, then slowly closed her eyes. By morning, the captain and crew were informed. They were not happy. "Virelins are dangerous," the navigator whispered. "What if she's a spy? Or worse, what if her enemies come looking for her?" Another said. Daniel stood by the medbay door. "She's not dangerous. She's hurt, and she's alone." The captain looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "She can stay, but she's your responsibility." Daniel agreed. Over the next 2 days, the alien woman remained silent. She moved slowly, never far from the medbay. The crew kept their distance, and she seemed to prefer it that way. But every time Daniel entered, she watched him. He fixed the machines. He cleaned the floors. He told stories about Earth, about sunsets, rain, oceans, and music. He didn't know if she understood, but he kept talking. Then, on the 3rd night, something changed. Daniel brought her a new tray of food. As he placed it on the table, she reached out and gently touched his wrist. He froze. Then she pointed to her own chest and whispered something in a soft, strange language. The translator finally caught a few words. "Sarava," it said. My name, Sarava. Daniel smiled. Sarava, that's beautiful. She tilted her head. Then, in a broken digital voice through the translator, she repeated, You said, I look amazing. He nodded, suddenly feeling a little embarrassed. Yeah, I did. And I meant it. There was silence. Then she said slowly, clearly, in a voice that didn't need translation this time. You look amazing, too. For the next few days, Daniel spent more time with Sarava. He showed her the ship's common areas, explaining how things worked. He was careful to avoid overwhelming her with too much information, but he could see the spark of curiosity in her eyes. The Virellans, from what he knew, were known for their high intelligence and deep emotions, but it was rare to see one this close. Most Virellans kept to themselves, either in their hidden colonies or on diplomatic missions. No one ever spoke of them as individuals. Sarava's silence was not uncomfortable. It was peaceful. She would watch him from the corner of the room, always alert, but never intrusive. And whenever Daniel spoke to her, even about the most mundane things, she would listen with a calm intensity, as if he were revealing some great mystery. But there was something more to it now, something that had shifted between them since that moment in the medbay. You look amazing, Daniel had said. And for the first time, Sarava had looked back at him and said, You look amazing too. She had not spoken since then, but her eyes followed him, as if she was waiting for him to say more. Daniel didn't understand why it felt important, but it did. It made him realize how much humanity had in common with someone so different. It made him wonder if there was more to the Virellans than the stories he had heard. That evening, Daniel went to check on her again. He knocked lightly on the door to the medbay. Sarava, he called out. How are you feeling? The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the ship's engines in the background. He stepped in, carrying a small tray of food. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the stars through the small window. Her eyes glowed softly in the dark. I brought you some food, Daniel said, placing the tray down on the table next to her. Sarava didn't respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the stars, her posture still and graceful. Daniel had gotten used to this, the way she would seem so distant, almost lost in thought, before her attention shifted back to him. He felt a strange comfort in it, but he also sensed that something was troubling her. Are you okay? He asked gently. She turned her head toward him, her long silver hair flowing with the movement. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire universe had paused. I don't understand, she said, her voice soft and slow. The translator worked, but there was a quiet sadness in her tone. I don't understand your world, your people, your ways. Daniel sat down next to her. He didn't try to offer any answers right away. He just sat with her, the silence between them feeling more comfortable than it had ever been before. I guess we're all just trying to figure it out, Daniel said after a moment. Humans, I mean. We've got a lot of flaws, a lot of problems. But we also have something no one else seems to have. Choice. We don't have to follow a set path. We can create our own. Sarava looked down at her hands, as though she were considering his words. She then lifted her gaze to the stars once again. On my planet, she said slowly, there was no choice. There was only order, only duty. We were told who we were, what we would be, and how we would live. She paused, her voice barely above a whisper. I never knew anything else. Daniel's heart went out to her. It wasn't just the pain in her voice, but the way she spoke of her people, of a life so controlled that even the possibility of freedom seemed alien to her. Well, you're free now, Daniel said, trying to give her a reassuring smile. You don't have to live like that anymore. You can decide who you are, what you want to do. Sarava turned her eyes back to him, her expression unreadable. I have no name, she said softly. No title. Nothing to define me. Daniel thought about it for a moment. Then he smiled. You have a name now, he said. You told me your name was Sarava. That's a good start. And as for the rest, well, it's up to you. You can be whoever you want." Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time, Daniel saw a flicker of hope in them. It was faint, but it was there. I will learn," Sarava said, almost to herself. "I will try." Over the next few days, Sarava seemed to open up a little more. She would follow Daniel around the ship, watching him as he worked. Sometimes, she would mimic his actions, trying to learn how to fix things, how to navigate, how to do the things he did. Daniel was careful to teach her without overwhelming her. He didn't know how to teach an alien species, but he did his best. He showed her the ropes, explained the controls, and helped her understand the simple pleasures of being free. The other crew members remained wary of her, still unsure of what to make of the Virellan woman. But Daniel defended her. To him, Sarava wasn't some alien threat. She was a person, just like him. Someone who had been hurt, someone who was learning what it meant to be human. That night, Daniel was working in the engine room when he heard a soft knock on the door. He looked up, and there stood Sarava, holding a small, carefully crafted piece of metal. It was shaped like a star. "I made this," she said, offering it to him. Daniel took the star carefully, surprised by the delicate craftsmanship. It was beautiful. "Thank you," he said. "It's beautiful." Sarava nodded and turned to leave, but before she did, she paused and looked at him one last time. "You look amazing," she said quietly. Daniel smiled, his heart skipping a beat. "You do too, Sarava." And for the first time, he believed it was true. The stars outside the solstice runner seemed to glow brighter as they passed through the vast expanse of space. Daniel sat at the helm, his hands resting lightly on the controls. The ship's hum was a constant, soothing sound, but the quiet of space made everything feel a little more intense. He had gotten used to the silence, but it didn't always feel comfortable. He glanced over at the medbay door, where Sarava had spent most of her time since they had rescued her. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see her sitting by the window, staring at the stars. She hadn't said much since their conversation about her name, but he felt a shift. She seemed different now, more open, more willing to learn. Sarava had started spending more time with him, following him around the ship, asking questions in her soft voice. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were thoughtful and filled with curiosity. It reminded him of his first days aboard the ship, when he had been learning everything too. But there was something else, something that went deeper than just curiosity. It was as though Sarava was searching for something, something that only humanity seemed to offer. As Daniel steered the ship through an asteroid field, he noticed Sarava enter the control room. She was standing silently behind him, watching him work. He didn't have to look up to know she was there. She had become a part of his routine, like the sound of the engines or the hum of the lights. He could almost sense her presence. "Hey, Sarava," he said without turning around. "Want to help me with this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved to his side, her silver hair flowing gently with the movement. Daniel handed her a small console. "We need to adjust the ship's speed to avoid those asteroids. Just follow the readings and make sure we stay on course." Sarava studied the console in her hands. She was still learning the language, but the technology was universal enough that she caught on quickly. She had an intuitive understanding of systems, a trait that seemed to run through her people. Daniel was impressed by how fast she picked things up. "Like this?" Sarava asked after a few moments, her voice soft. "Exactly," Daniel said, giving her a smile. "You're a quick learner." For the first time, Sarava's lips twitched into a small smile, something so rare and fleeting that it almost felt like a secret. She looked over at him, and for a moment, their gazes met. There was something in her eyes that made Daniel's heart race. It was as if she had found something important, something deep inside herself, but she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. As the ship glided through the asteroid field without a hitch, Daniel couldn't help but feel proud. Sarava had helped him make it through, and together, they had worked as a team. They weren't just two people from different species anymore. They were allies, working side by side to overcome obstacles in the vast unknown of space. The days that followed were filled with small moments of connection. They would share meals together, with Scifi slowly beginning to open up more. She would ask about Earth, about humans, and about the things Daniel loved. He told her about the sunsets he missed, about the quiet places where he used to escape as a child, and about his dreams of adventure. In return, Scifi told him about her own world, a place so distant from Earth that the idea of it seemed like a dream. Her planet was a place of order, where emotion was controlled and individuality was suppressed. She spoke of the struggle her people faced when emotions started to surface, when the balance they had worked so hard to maintain was threatened. "I never knew what it was like to feel free," Scifi had said one evening. "On my world, we are all part of the whole. No one is special. No one is different." Daniel had been quiet, listening closely. He knew that feeling. He understood what it was like to feel trapped by expectations, to live a life that didn't feel like his own. But he also knew that there was something beautiful about being able to choose, to make mistakes, to change direction. "Freedom is a strange thing," Daniel said, "but it's also a beautiful one." Scifi had smiled at him again, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. Not forced, not out of obligation, but because she had learned something from him. Something that she had never known before. But despite their growing bond, the rest of the crew remained cautious. They kept their distance, unsure of how to treat Scifi. She was an alien after all, and no matter how much Daniel defended her, there were always whispers. They weren't sure if they could trust her. One evening, Daniel was in the mess hall, fixing a small repair in the refrigeration unit, when he overheard a conversation between two crew members. "I don't trust her," one of them said. "She's a Virelan. We don't know what she wants." "We can't just let her on the ship like this," another replied. "What if she's spying on us? Or worse, what if the Virelans come for her?" Daniel frowned and quickly finished his work, making a mental note to speak with them later. He didn't like the way they were talking. Scifi had shown no signs of being dangerous. She wasn't like the Virelans they had heard about in stories. Cold, calculating, and ruthless. She was just someone trying to find her place in a world that was nothing like her own. When he returned to the medbay that evening, Scifi was sitting by the window again, looking at the stars. Her face was calm, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Daniel hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Scifi turned to him, her eyes soft. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. "I don't belong anywhere." Daniel shook his head. "You do belong. You belong with us." Scifi didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, she smiled, the first real smile Daniel had ever seen from her. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I think I am starting to understand." And for the first time, Daniel realized that she wasn't just learning about humanity. She was learning about herself. The days in space seemed to blur together, as if time itself had forgotten its place in the vast stretch of the galaxy. The Solstice Runner moved smoothly through the endless sea of stars, with Daniel at the helm and Scifi by his side. Though the ship was small, it felt large now, a place where they had made their home. Daniel had never imagined that his routine life would become so intertwined with an alien. But Scifi wasn't just any alien. She had become his friend. She would follow him around, asking questions, observing how humans lived. They shared moments together, small things like fixing a console or watching the stars. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Scifi was holding something back. There was a part of her that she had not yet revealed. A secret, perhaps, or something deeper. She was changing, yes, but in a way that seemed almost too quiet, too hidden. One evening, as the ship sailed peacefully through the cosmos, Daniel found himself sitting beside her in the observation room. He had noticed that she often spent time alone here, gazing out at the stars, her eyes distant and thoughtful. "Do you miss your home?" Daniel asked gently, breaking the silence. Sarava's gaze did not leave the stars. She had grown more comfortable speaking, though she still took her time choosing her words carefully. "I miss what I was told I should miss," she said softly. "I miss the place where I was born, the people who are supposed to be my family. That I don't know them. Not really. I never had the chance to." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. He knew what it was like to feel disconnected, to long for something that wasn't truly his. "I think we all have a place we're supposed to belong to," Daniel said. "But it doesn't always feel right, does it?" Sarava turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know who I am anymore. I was taught that my people are everything, that the greater good is above all else. But now I'm learning that there are other ways to live, ways I never knew." Daniel felt a pang of sympathy. She was lost, and yet she was finding herself again, in a place so far from her home. He could see it in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror years ago, when he had realized he wanted more than just a quiet life in space. "You're not alone," Daniel said quietly. "I've got your back. You can figure this out." For the first time in days, Sarava smiled. It wasn't a small smile, either. It was the kind of smile that reached her eyes and warmed her whole face. She looked at him, and for a brief moment, Daniel thought he saw something more than just gratitude. There was a bond forming between them, a bond that went beyond human and alien. The next morning, a new challenge arrived. A sharp signal cut through the ship's communication systems, an incoming transmission from the Virellan government. Daniel immediately recognized the urgency in the message. "Captain, we've got a problem," he said, quickly tapping the console. The captain rushed over, and the two listened as the transmission played out. "Virellan vessel U.S. Saran en route to intercept the Solstice runner," the message stated. "We request immediate cooperation. Unauthorized Virellan subject aboard your vessel. Surrender at once." Sarava froze. She had been standing nearby, and Daniel noticed her tense posture. The calm, quiet demeanor she always wore was gone in an instant. "They're coming for me," Sarava said in a strained voice, her eyes wide. "I have to go. I can't let you all get caught in this." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We're not surrendering. You're part of this crew now. We'll figure something out." The captain turned to Sarava, his expression serious. "You don't have to go anywhere, but we need to know what's going on. Who are these people? What do they want from you?" Sarava swallowed hard, her face pale. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "They are my people," she began, her voice shaky. "They are the Virellan government. They exiled me for wanting to live my own life. I didn't follow the rules, and now I'm a fugitive." Daniel felt a sharp twist of anger, not for Sarava, but for the system that had driven her away. She wasn't a criminal. She was someone trying to find herself in a world that didn't understand her. "We're not letting them take you," Daniel said, his voice calm but determined. "We'll fight." Sarava shook her head. "It's not that simple. They won't stop until I'm back. My people, they don't accept freedom. They think order is everything." "I don't care about that," the captain interjected. "We make our own rules out here. No one tells us what to do." Daniel nodded, his mind already racing. There had to be a way out. They had to get Sarava to safety, and he wasn't about to let a government decide her fate. She deserved more than that. The crew worked quickly. They patched the ship's systems, activating defense measures and making adjustments that would allow them to outmaneuver the approaching Virellan vessel. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. As the Virellan ship drew closer, Sarava stood with Daniel at the ship's helm. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I never wanted to drag you into this." Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't apologize. We're in this together." The tension grew as the Virellan ship drew closer. The crew prepared for a confrontation, but Daniel knew one thing for sure. They would not give up without a fight. And as the stars streaked past them, Daniel realized something he hadn't before, that no matter where they were from, no matter what species they belonged to, the fight for freedom was the same for everyone. Scifi wasn't just an alien to him. She was a person, someone with dreams and hopes. She was human in every way that mattered. The tension in the ship's control room was palpable. Every crew member was at their post, eyes glued to their stations, hands ready for action. Daniel stood at the helm, his fingers lightly hovering over the controls. The sound of the Virellan vessel approaching felt almost deafening. It wasn't just a physical presence in space. It was a looming threat, one that Scifi had been trying to escape for what felt like a lifetime. Scifi stood beside him, her eyes distant. Her usual calm was replaced with a kind of quiet panic. The fear she had kept hidden deep inside her was now evident in the way she clenched her fists, the slight tremor in her fingers. "They won't stop," she whispered, almost to herself. "They'll never stop coming for me." Daniel didn't look at her, but kept his focus on the controls. He knew she was terrified. Her whole life had been controlled, and now, for the first time, she had a chance to choose what she wanted. He wasn't going to let that be taken from her. "We won't let them take you," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with determination. The Virellan ship loomed larger on the monitors. Daniel could see the sharp outline of its massive hull, its sleek and intimidating design. It was a warship built for speed and power, and they were nowhere near a match for it. But there was one thing that made them different. They were human, and that made all the difference. Humans never back down from a fight. Daniel wasn't sure if the Virellans would even let them speak, but he had one plan in mind. He would buy them time. Time for Scifi to get away. Time for the ship to escape. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her, not on his watch. "Captain, what's the plan?" asked the first mate, her eyes locked on the screen showing the Virellan ship drawing closer. "We fight," the captain said firmly, not looking away from the screen. "We do everything we can to get away. We can't let them take her back." Daniel nodded, adjusting the ship's course to give them the best chance of escape. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Scifi looked over at him, her eyes filled with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to express before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For everything." Daniel smiled at her, trying to keep his own nerves steady. "We're not giving up on you." The Virellan ship hailed them as they approached a narrow asteroid field, a dangerous area full of rocky debris. The communication system crackled to life, and the cold, commanding voice of the Virellan officer came through. "This is Commander Vaskar of the Virellan Empire. Surrender your ship immediately and prepare to be boarded. The fugitive must return to face judgment." Scifi's face went pale, but she didn't flinch. She had learned, over time, to stay calm in situations like this. But Daniel could see the weight of the moment in her eyes, the years of running, the endless feeling of being hunted, of never knowing peace. "We're not going anywhere," Daniel responded, his voice clear and strong. "This is our ship, and no one's taking anyone off it." The Virellan voice on the other end seemed to grow colder, more threatening. "You have made a grave mistake, human. You will regret this." Before the communication was cut off, Daniel heard a sharp, commanding order, and the Virellan ship's weapons powered up. "Brace yourselves," the captain shouted. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The ship jerked as the first blast from the Virellan warship struck the shields. The whole crew felt the shockwave reverberate through the hull. Scifi stumbled, but Daniel was there in an instant, steadying her. The ship shuddered again as more blasts hit. "Shields are holding, but they won't last," the navigator called out from her station. Daniel's fingers flew over the controls, guiding the ship through a sharp turn to avoid another barrage. The asteroid field was ahead, dangerous, but it was their only chance. "We can make it through there," Daniel said. It's the only way. Sarava glanced at him, her eyes wide. You're insane, she said, but there was a spark of something else in her voice. It was more than just fear. It was the first hint of hope. We've got no choice, Daniel said. Hold on tight. The Solstice runner veered into the asteroid field, narrowly dodging huge chunks of rock. The Virellan ship followed, but it wasn't built for this kind of terrain. The larger warship struggled to avoid the asteroids, its weapons firing in blind bursts. Daniel was focused, his eyes darting between the asteroids and the control panel. He steered the ship with precision, narrowly missing the larger rocks. He knew every second counted. Each asteroid was an obstacle, but it also slowed down the Virellan ship, giving them a fighting chance. Sarava watched him, her face filled with awe and something else. Admiration, perhaps. She had seen humans survive the impossible before, but now she was experiencing it firsthand. She had always been told that humans were reckless, that they lacked the discipline of the Virellans. But now she saw something different. Humans didn't give up. They didn't back down, even when faced with the worst odds. The Solstice runner swerved to the left, narrowly missing an asteroid that exploded behind them. The Virellan ship wasn't far behind, but it was slower, taking more time to avoid the dangerous rocks. We're almost there, Daniel said, his eyes locked on the forward screen. The Virellan ship fired again, but it missed. The asteroid field was doing its job, and they were getting closer to a narrow gap in the field that could lead to open space. Keep going, the captain yelled. Daniel pushed the ship harder, urging it forward. The Solstice runner slipped through the gap in the asteroid field, the Virellan ship still chasing, but now far behind. The crew let out a collective breath of relief as the danger passed. Sarava looked at Daniel, her expression softening. You did it, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Daniel gave her a small smile. We did it. As they continued into open space, away from the Virellans, Daniel couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had done it. Against all odds, they had escaped. And for the first time in a long while, Sarava seemed to believe it too, that she had a place in this world. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something worth saving. The days following their escape from the Virellan warship were filled with quiet relief. The Solstice runner drifted through the quiet void of space, its engines humming softly as the crew caught their breath. They were safe for now. The Virellan ship had given up the chase after losing track of them in the asteroid field. But Sarava wasn't ready to relax. She had been through too much. And though they were safe, her past was still close behind her. The Virellans didn't give up easily, and she knew they would be back. There was still a price on her head, a mark that would follow her until the day she was captured or silenced. Daniel understood this. He could see the worry in her eyes every time they spoke of the future. But for the first time, he also saw something else. Determination. It was a quiet, subtle change, but it was there. Sarava wasn't just a fugitive anymore. She was someone who had tasted freedom and wasn't willing to let it slip away. The crew had decided to make their way toward a safe zone near the borders of neutral space. It wasn't much, but it was a place where they could lie low, fix the ship, and get some much-needed rest. The captain had made the decision to stay out of the Virellan Empire's reach, for as long as they could. Daniel was in the engine room when he heard a soft knock at the door. Come in, he called, wiping his hands on a rag. Sarava stepped inside, her eyes softer than he had ever seen them. She had grown more comfortable around the crew, but there was still a sense of distance, a part of her that kept her separate from everyone else. I was wondering if you needed help with anything, she said quietly. Daniel looked up at her, surprised. It was clear she had been thinking deeply about something. The serious look on her face told him that whatever was on her mind was important. Sure, he said, setting the tools aside. I can always use an extra pair of hands. Sarava moved toward the workbench and picked up a piece of equipment, her fingers running over it gently. She was still learning, But Daniel could see how much she had grown in the short time they had spent together. She wasn't just the quiet, distant alien she had been when she first came aboard. She was becoming someone else, someone who understood what it meant to be human, or at least to understand freedom. As they worked together, Daniel couldn't help but notice how much more comfortable Scifi seemed in her own skin. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved now, a confidence that had been absent when they had first met. "So, what's on your mind?" Daniel asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Scifi didn't answer right away. She was focused on the equipment in front of her, her brows furrowed as she worked on the wiring. Finally, she looked up, her gaze meeting his. "I've been thinking about what you said." Scifi paused for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "I didn't know what freedom really was until I came here. On my planet, we were always told what to do, what to think. There was no room for anything else. But here, with you, I see that there's something else, something more than just surviving." Daniel nodded, understanding what she meant. It was what he had struggled with for most of his life. The constant need to fit into a system, to play by someone else's rules. But he had learned that the beauty of life came in the moments when he didn't follow the rules, the moments when he chose for himself. "I think I'm starting to understand," Scifi continued, her voice steady. "The idea that we can choose, that we can decide what's important to us. It's more than just freedom. It's a way of living, a way of being." Daniel smiled at her, his heart light. "That's exactly it. It's about living for yourself, not because someone tells you what you have to do." Scifi looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edges of the tool she was holding. "I've spent my life thinking that I had to fit into the mold that others made for me. But now, I'm realizing I can make my own mold. I can choose who I want to be." Daniel stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on the workbench. "And who do you want to be?" Scifi met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I don't know yet, but I think I'm starting to find out. And that's a start." For a long moment, they stood there, the quiet hum of the ship the only sound in the room. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. It was a moment where Scifi began to reclaim herself, to shape her future rather than live in the shadow of her past. Daniel didn't know what the future held for either of them, but he knew one thing. Scifi had changed, and in a way, so had he. They were both finding their own paths, and somehow, their paths had become intertwined. That evening, the crew gathered in the mess hall. The tension from the previous days had lifted, and there was a sense of relief in the air. They had made it through a difficult situation, but the danger wasn't over. The Virellans would be back eventually, but for now, they had some time to breathe. Scifi sat down at the table, her posture relaxed for the first time since joining the crew. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was simply herself. Daniel sat next to her, offering her a warm smile. She returned it with one of her own, a smile that was more than just gratitude. It was a smile of acceptance, of understanding. She had found something that she hadn't realized she was searching for. Freedom, yes, but also belonging. She had found it in herself, in the people around her, and in the choices she was beginning to make. "I think I'm ready," Scifi said softly, her eyes meeting Daniel's. "Ready for what?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Ready to live," she said, her voice firm with newfound conviction. Daniel smiled back at her. "Well then, welcome to the journey." And as the stars outside the window glowed softly, Daniel realized that they had both found something precious. Not just survival, but the freedom to choose, to grow, and to live. The quiet hum of the engines filled the control room of the Solstice Runner as it glided through the calm expanse of space. The ship was far from perfect, but it had become their sanctuary. The crew, though small, had grown close over the past few weeks, united by the same goal, survival. But there was more than just survival now. There was hope, and there was purpose. And for Scifi, it was a kind of freedom she had never imagined before. Daniel sat at the helm, his hands resting lightly on the controls. He glanced over at Sarava, who was sitting in the chair beside him, looking out at the stars. Her silver hair shimmered faintly in the soft light from the console, and her gaze was fixed on the vastness of space. They had come a long way since that first day when he had said, "You look amazing," a simple compliment that had opened the door to something far deeper than either of them had expected. Sarava had changed in ways Daniel had not anticipated. She was no longer the distant, fearful woman who had boarded the ship that day. She had found something within herself, something that had been buried beneath the walls of her past. And though the Virellan Empire still hunted her, Sarava was no longer just a fugitive. She was someone who had chosen to live for herself, not for the expectations of others. She had found humanity in the way the crew cared for each other, in the way Daniel had shown her what it meant to be free, and in the way she had begun to see the world with new eyes. "Have you ever wondered what it's like to belong?" Sarava asked softly, her voice distant, as if she were speaking to herself rather than to Daniel. Daniel turned his attention to her. "Belonging," he repeated, his voice thoughtful. "I think everyone wants to feel like they belong somewhere, even if they don't always know where that is.